Tuesday. The price of a home in the GTA, no surprise, continues to soar. Royal LePage House Price Survey came out this morning saying the aggregate price of a home in the GTA is up something like 20% from this time last year. In the midst of all of that, three levels of government will meet today in this city to talk about the housing market. Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau called the meeting. He'll sit down with his Ontario counterpart, Charles Sousa, and the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, who joined us in studio this morning.
Good morning.
What do you want out of this meeting?
Well, I mean, I've sort of indicated I'd like to see us really address some longer-term issues on supply of affordable rental housing. That's at the top of my list. I'd like to see much better data because right now we're sort of flying blind much of the time in terms of knowing. I think the experts tell us, Matt, that there's a degree of speculation going on in the marketplace. But if you said, do we know for sure who's speculating and the kind of speculation that's going on, we actually don't. I mean, there just aren't records to tell us that. And then finally, I've sort of said I'd like to take a look at, and we are doing it at the city level, a vacant unit tax, because there are quite a few housing units vacant. And if you just proceed from the premise that housing's meant to be lived in, not invested in by people and kept empty, I mean, I have no problem with people investing in housing, but it shouldn't be kept empty. So those are the things that I'm going to talk about, but I think everybody's going to bring a different perspective to this, and that's why it's good we're getting together and hopefully can proceed on the basis there should be no surprises. And also, I don't think there are any magic answers to this. I mean, I think if somebody had one, it would have been unveiled by now, so at least we're going to talk.
How alarmed are you by what is happening right now? People use the word crisis. They talk about people moving out of the city. They talk about people not coming to the city because it's too expensive. You've been holding a series of roundtable conversations around this. How concerned are you by what's happening right now?
I'm very concerned because I'm having roundtable conversations too, outside the country in Silicon Valley and other places to try to convince people to come here. And one of the things, obviously, you have to, they know of our way of life and they know of our values here. And I think those are very, very attractive things. And our existing tech community and all those things people are familiar with that are listening. And you have to have a place to live, though. And you have to have a place to live that is within the realm of affordability. Silicon Valley is starting to price itself out of, sort of livability for a lot of people. And so it's just a very human thing. I mean, people who are already here, I mean, have to live here and have to have a hope of maybe having a home, down the road or now. So it's concerning, and it's concerning because there is definitely some degree of speculation going on in the market, and that's not a healthy thing. A marketplace is a marketplace, and prices go up and down, but when it's influenced by speculators, this is something that is distorting the marketplace.
So when you speak with people in Silicon Valley and beyond, the people that we want to lure here, we can talk about people who are here already in just a moment, but are you hearing from people who would want to come here that they are reconsidering because of the cost of housing?
No, to be candid, people raise our income tax rates more so than they raise the price of housing, because the price of housing, and I know people don't like to hear this, and I don't want to sound uncaring about the people who are here, but our price of housing compared to some of those places is still, believe it or not, within the realm of average. But it is a consideration, and I think it's more of a consideration for people who live here who are going to lose a sense of hope if they're 22 years old or 25 years old and they've just started their career and they're sort of looking and saying, well, sometime I would like to have the same opportunity I had as a kid to grow up in a house with a backyard near a school. This is something where people are starting to lose a sense of hope, and I think that's not necessarily healthy for a city going forward.
You said we're flying blind, and one of the areas in which it seems as though there's not a lot of information but a lot of talk is around the issue of foreign buyers. Do we have any sense at all as to how many people from abroad are buying property here?
I would say not really. I mean, because I've certainly asked for that information, and the Toronto Real Estate Board comes forward with some number, and you're not really entirely sure where it came from. The government of Ontario, which would be the most likely place where you'd find this information, really has just said they're going to start collecting it about now, and so I don't think they have it. And this is one of the problems, is that when you're looking for a solution, or some kind of thing that's going to help cool the market, you have to understand what's causing it to go up, and there is I think there may be as much domestic speculation going on of people who are buying and selling houses because they think it's going up and up and up and they're trying to take advantage of that, as there is speculation from outside the country. But we actually just don't know, and that's very disconcerting because Premier Wynne referred last week to unintended consequences. People will say, well, what could be wrong with acting on this housing situation? The answer is, if you act and you have unintended consequences, there's a lot of people who went out, probably a lot of those listening, who borrowed quite a lot of money to buy a house based on a value that it had on a given day. And if that value suddenly dropped and the bank's phoning to say, oh, by the way, we need some more money from you, this is going to be a serious problem. And there's a real estate industry and a construction industry. So that's why I've used the expressions responsible and effective to describe anything any government does, not just knee-jerk, stuff that is going to make people feel better. You have to do something that is going to cause people to think there's some action being taken, but that it's responsible and effective action.
It's interesting. The Premier's talking about this, and of course Charles Sousa will be at your meeting today. He has a budget that's coming out at the end of this month. He has an election next year in which his party, if you believe the polls, faces obliteration. And so they have to act in a way that is going to address the problem, but also is going to earn them some respect and earn them some support. Based on that, do you expect concrete measures to come out of the meeting today? People have talked about the idea, or out of the budget, people have talked about a speculator tax. Is that something that you expect to see in the budget?
I doubt. Well, I think you will see, because this government of Ontario has signaled through the Premier, through the Minister repeatedly and quite concisely that there will be something. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, there will be something of that nature. I don't think it'll happen today, because I think the purpose of today is to get together and actually sort of compare notes on what we've heard from all the experts, compare the information we do have about the nature of the problem, and then go forward from there. And I think as much as anything else is to make sure there are no surprises, for each other as we go about trying to explore things we can do.
Do we need to think differently about how and where we live in this city? It's interesting when you talk about other cities, in cities like London, in cities like New York, I don't know that people expect at some point in time that they're going to be able to own a house, that we have an owner mentality here, that people will own a property with a backyard and garage or street parking or something like that, that in many other cities they think differently about where people live.
They do, and I don't think here this should come as any surprise to people, because if you look at the long-standing provincial growth plan, it provides for Toronto's growth, which is of course happening, tens of thousands of people coming here every year, and thank goodness for that, to happen through what they call densification, which means more people will own a house, but they'll own it in a vertical building. And that's why, I've spoken so much about parks and schools and transit and so on, because we need it to take account of the fact people are living differently. But I think the notion that you will own housing differently, or that some people may rent long term, which happens in a lot of those other great cities, is something that will change, because you just can't have, there's a limited supply of land here, and tens of thousands, in fact millions more people coming here in the coming years.
It's not just owning, it's also renting. Do you support rent control?
Well, I think that the consequences of rent control can be, the cure can be sort of as bad as the disease. People are finding it stressful to pay rents. I have said that I think the landlord should have come forward and said, for the next couple of years, while the situation is difficult in terms of supply, we will agree to moderate our rents. I just look at the experience we had the last time it was brought in, when the number of units being built, just at a time, Matt, when there really was some rebirth taking place in purpose-built rental in Toronto, people coming forward and saying, we want to build rental accommodation. I worry a lot, and I said this to the Premier in our meeting between the mayors and herself last week, this will choke off those developments and people will stop building rental apartment buildings.
Do we really believe that people will stop building rental apartments because they can't make, they're still going to make a lot of money. Well, they're just not going to make as much money?
The bottom line, Matt, is that it's people investing in these buildings, and they expect to have a return. And if they look at their return as being limited, it really depends on what the government does. But if the government, again, tightens that screw too much, the answer to your question is yes. People will either just say, fine, we'll build condos, or they'll build nothing. And that actually is proven out by what went on in the 1970s, where you saw tens of thousands of units being built, and then all of a sudden the year after it dropped down, and we've never really recovered the level of construction in rental since then. So I said to the Premier last week, if you're going to do something, which again they've fairly clearly signaled they're going to, then it should be accompanied by measures which mitigate that by saying, okay, we'll take the HST off building materials for purpose-built rental accommodation, or something like that that says to people in that business, we still want you to build, because it's crucially important we have more affordable rental accommodation in Toronto.
I guess the other side of that is the stories that we hear of people who live in buildings that were built after 1991, which have no rent control, and in which, because of this market now, the rent is doubling. They get a note and say, your rent goes from $1,800 a month, we're doubling it. they can't pay. They have to move out. They don't know where they're going to live. They end up moving to Stratford. They move to Cambridge. They move to Guelph. And that the city loses not just people who we want to be here, but people who want to be here themselves.
Those stories are disconcerting. I don't know how many of them there are. The ones that there are get a lot of attention, and I guess one is too many. But that's why, as well, we have to increase the supply of affordable rental housing. And again, back to forgetting about rent controls and forgetting about even this meeting today, I've been talking for years now. I mean, it sort of gets frustrating at a time about the need for the other governments to get back into business with us, and the feds have come forward. We're waiting on the province to say we're going to step up and have programs like our Open Doors program, which says we're putting in land, we're putting in money to stimulate the construction of affordable rental housing, because there is a real lack of supply of that, and it impacts the entire rental market and leads to the kind of situation you're talking about.
In the midst of all of this and the doom and gloom, is there a part of you that is celebrating the velocity, the heat of this market? Because we as a city get a lot of money from the land transfer tax.
No, I'm not celebrating it. I mean, the fact is we based our budget on a sort of an approximation of what we thought we'd take in based on a real estate market that remained sort of healthy. What I am celebrating, if there's anything to be celebrated, and there, you have to be very concerned about these housing prices and rental prices, I'm celebrating the fact Toronto is such a desirable place to live. Because let's remember, a lot of what's driving prices up is the law of supply and demand that is a healthy kind of demand, in that it's people coming here, they want to live here, they want to rent here, they want to buy here, and stay here and build their lives here.
But let's go back to that, though. If the sales went down, we saw it in Vancouver, a foreign buyer's tax, sales cooled, and the prices cooled, that would have a hit on our budget, on the City of Toronto budget, a budget that you've built in some way around land transfer tax revenue.
Yes,
you must be concerned
I've raised
about
this
that
issue and mentioned it in some of my public statements, which is that obviously I would hope that the province or the federal government, if they bring in measures that might have some impact on our finances, will take that into account. But having said all that, I mean, the objective here is to try and do the right thing, to do something responsible and effective and balanced in the sense that you try to cool the market and cool off some of the speculation without damaging the marketplace itself and causing a lot of grief for homeowners, more so than government finances. I mean, government finances we'll deal with, I hope, in partnership with our other governments, but what you want to do is provide some measure of hope, some measure of relief from a marketplace that seems to be heated up more than it should be.
Tomorrow, your executive committee is going to look at the closure of 134 Toronto community housing units in the Jane and Finch neighborhood. More than 400 units are expected to close by the end of this year, largely because of the repair backlog that you and I have spoken about a number of times. How are you going to replace those units if 134 units close down?
Well, let's understand why those 134 are closing. We actually went up. I went up personally to that neighborhood and announced we were going to put money into refurbishing those units. And when we went in to actually start the work, they were too far beyond, and that's got to be at the doorstep of previous governments of all stripes and all levels, that would be allowed to happen. But now they have to be torn down. They're just not worth repairing, and we're going to replace those by revitalizing that neighborhood, as we've done in places like Regent Park and Lawrence Heights.
That's a long game.
Well, it is a long game, but I mean, the bottom line is at least we are facing up to these things now. We're going in and we're taking a look at actually wanting to invest in repairing, but if it's not worth it, we're just saying so. But that is why I have been such a broken record, as you alluded to, on the subject of needing help with the repair bill so we can get on with these repairs. The longer you leave it, it doesn't get better, it gets worse, and increasing the supply. And some of this money for affordable rental housing will go to developments and communities like that where people need a bit of help with their housing, and that's why I'm so anxious to make sure we have a three-way partnership: federal, provincial, and municipal. And at the moment, the provincial government is not playing its full part.
And so in the meantime, the people who live in those 134 units?
Well, we will do as we did when we revitalized Regent Park in a different circumstance. That was a planned, kind of movement of people, and we've learned a lot from our experience, so we don't just say, well, you can go live in Scarborough, because that's right across the city. And so we'll find housing for those people. But the real issue is that we let those housing units in that development get to the point where when we went in finally to repair them with the city's money, we're investing $250 million of city money in repairs this year. They were beyond repair. And that's the point that we don't want to get to with other housing units, which is why we have to move forward with, I hope, some provincial help from this budget upcoming to repair houses.
Speaks to the real difficulty and the complexity of housing in this city.
Oh, it's an incredibly complex issue, and that's why people who expect out of today's meeting or any other meeting any magic wand, any magic answer that's going to solve everything. They shouldn't expect that. It's an incredibly complicated issue, and we do have a real lack of information, on which to make these decisions. So that's why it's good we're getting together and comparing notes on all the meetings we've had with experts to try and help us decide what the best thing is to do or best series of things.
We'll talk, I'm sure, in the wake of the meeting. In the meantime, thank you.
Thank you.
It's John Tory.